My son was born black, and I thought my wife had cheated. But what my boss was hiding, I got divorced, gave up the baby, and destroyed the family. And then I found out who switched my son and why. It all makes sense now. Subscribe so you don't miss other stories. Write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? I used to think that happiness was a simple thing. A well-brewed cup of coffee in the morning, the laughter of children in the backyard, the quiet presence of a woman who knew how to look at you without saying a word and somehow still say everything. My name is Daniel Everett. I'm 41 years old, and for the last 15 years of my life, I've done everything the way a good man is supposed to. Every morning, I woke at 6:30 sharp, without the need for an alarm. My body just knew. I'd pull on my robe, walk down the hall, and pause at the bedroom door where my 2 kids slept, just to listen for a second. That peaceful breathing, those small noises kids make when they shift in their dreams, it always made something settle inside me. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon, thanks to the air freshener Hannah insisted on keeping plugged in near the kitchen. I used to tease her for it, saying it was too sweet, but secretly, I loved how it reminded me I was home. Our house wasn't big, but it was ours. A modest 2-story colonial tile with blue shutters, white siding, and a porch swing I'd sanded and painted myself the first summer we moved in. I'd spent weekends planting shrubs, fixing gutters, replacing shingles one by one, like a man building not just a home, but a sanctuary. And every evening, I'd come back to that porch after work, loosen my tie, and sit with Hannah while the sun went down and the kids played tag in the yard. Hannah was my compass. She was steady and clear-eyed, with the kind of beauty that didn't fade after 10 years of marriage and 2 kids. She had a habit of rubbing her left temple when she was reading and smiling just before she made a joke. She taught literature at a local high school and was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank you notes, and could recite whole passages of Jane Austen while folding laundry. She was 7 months pregnant with our 3rd child when everything began to change, though neither of us could see the storm yet. At work, I was what you'd call dependable. I'd been with Raymond West Capital for over 13 years, starting as a junior analyst and working my way up to senior portfolio consultant. I wasn't flashy, but I was precise. I double-checked my numbers, met deadlines early, and never gave HR a reason to learn my name. I came in at 8:15, left at 5:30. I never made a scene, never rocked the boat. If you asked around, people would say I was the kind of guy who brought donuts on Fridays and always remembered his coworkers' kids' names. And then she came back. It was a Tuesday morning when the email landed in our inboxes. Executive Leadership Update, return of Mrs. Elizabeth Vanderlake as managing partner and executive chairwoman. The subject line alone sent a ripple through the office. People whispered. Elizabeth Vanderlake was something of a legend, part myth, part ghost. She had inherited her father's stake in the company, but had disappeared from day-to-day operations years ago after a bitter divorce and the death of her only child. No one really knew where she'd been since. I remember sitting at my desk reading the memo again and again. Her name looked heavy on the screen, like a stone dropped into water. Some of the older partners straightened their ties and started practicing polite smiles in the reflection of their monitors. I didn't think much of it. I had a meeting at 9 o'clock and 2 client reports to finalize. Elizabeth Vanderlake might have owned the place, but I didn't imagine she'd ever speak to someone like me. I was wrong. She showed up 3 days later, just before lunch. I was walking back from the break room with a cup of tea for Hannah. She liked the lemon ginger kind, and I always brought some home, when I nearly ran into her in the hallway. She was taller than I expected, wearing a cream-colored blazer and black slacks with her blonde hair pulled back into a simple twist. No jewelry, no perfume, just a presence that made the air feel heavier. "Mr. Everett, is it?" she asked, looking directly at me. I nodded, not sure how she knew my name. "You've got a good eye for balanced funds," she said, almost casually, as if we were continuing a conversation I didn't remember starting. "I liked your report on the Winstead accounts. Clean, thorough, honest." I managed a polite thank you, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. She didn't wait for more, just nodded once and walked away, her heels clicking in perfect rhythm against the polished floors. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I should have, wondering what the hell had just happened. After that, I started noticing her more, or maybe she made it easy to be noticed. Elizabeth had a way of entering a room like she owned every square inch of it. And truthfully, she did. She attended more meetings than anyone expected, sat in on strategic reviews, joined lunch and learns, and asked sharp, specific questions. She wasn't just playing figurehead, she was watching, absorbing, hunting. But what unsettled me wasn't her presence in the boardroom, it was her gaze. Sometimes, during briefings, I'd feel it, hers, landing on me like a spotlight. Not flirtatious, not exactly, but intense, studying. She'd ask me questions in meetings when it wasn't necessary, invite me into small planning sessions where I didn't need to be. One day I found a coffee on my desk, no note, just the exact blend I drank, 2 sugars, a little milk. The only other person who knew that was Hannah. At first I brushed it off, coincidence. Maybe she asked around, maybe someone told her. But as the weeks passed, the pattern deepened. A casual touch on the sleeve when passing by, lingering eye contact that felt like it stretched seconds too long, little smiles that left me unsure whether I'd imagined them. My coworkers noticed. A guy from accounting nudged me during a budget presentation and whispered, "Dude, I think the Ice Queen's got a crush." I laughed it off, rolled my eyes, but I felt it. That twinge in my stomach. Not excitement, not flattery, something colder, like unease. Still, I didn't tell Hannah. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't want to bring a shadow into our home. Things were good, better than good. We'd picked out paint colors for the nursery, and the kids were arguing over baby names. On weekends, we took long walks around the neighborhood, and sometimes, when she was tired, I'd massage her swollen feet while she read aloud from a parenting book. One night, we sat on the back porch after putting the kids to bed. It was late spring and the air was warm, heavy with honeysuckle. Hannah leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Can you believe we've been here 10 years? I smiled. "Feels like yesterday and a lifetime at the same time." She turned to me, her eyes soft and thoughtful. "Are you happy, Daniel?" I looked at her then, really looked. At the woman who had stood beside me through every promotion, every sick child, every leaky faucet and tax return. At the woman carrying our 3rd child, her face glowing with the weight of it all. "Yes," I said, and meant it. "I really am." And I was. But if I'd been paying closer attention, I might have seen the hairline crack forming along the edge of that happiness. A sliver, almost invisible, but deepening. Not from anything we had done, but from someone, just beginning to press their thumb against the glass. Elizabeth Vanderlake was patient. She didn't push. She didn't cross lines, but she knew exactly where to stand, how to tilt the board just slightly so that eventually all the pieces might fall in her favor. At the time, I thought I was imagining it, but later, when I looked back, I would realize she had already begun. And I, in my comfort and certainty, had already started to slip. It began, like most tragedies do, on a day that was supposed to be filled with joy. The morning Hannah went into labor was calm, bright, almost cinematic. I remember how the sunlight streamed through the blinds in wide golden stripes, how she turned to me in bed just before dawn with a softness in her voice that could only mean one thing. "I think it's time," she whispered, her hand resting lightly on her belly. There was no panic, no rush. We'd done this twice before. I called her doctor, packed the hospital bag we had waiting by the door, buckled her gently into the car while she hummed under her breath through a contraction. The kids were still asleep when we left, and I kissed each of their foreheads in the quiet, promising I'd be home soon with their baby brother or sister. At the hospital, the check-in process was smooth. They brought Hannah into a private room, hooked her to monitors, and assured us everything was progressing well. I sat beside her, holding her hand through the waves of pain. Hours passed. We talked, we laughed nervously, we remembered the other births, the chaos and the wonder. The nurses were kind, efficient. It felt safe. It felt right. Until it didn't. At 2:13 p.m., after a final push and a flood of tears, the doctor lifted our child into the air, a boy. His lungs announced themselves with a healthy, primal cry. Hannah sobbed with joy, and I felt that strange, overwhelming pride again, the same primal awe I had known twice before. But when they cleaned him off and brought him to us, something froze in my chest. His skin? I stared, confused, waiting for my brain to catch up. He had dark skin, not olive, not slightly tanned, deep brown, beautiful, yes, but utterly inconsistent with our genes. Hannah and I were both white, with fair complexions and light eyes. Our other two children had inherited the same. This was not an anomaly, this was a rupture. I looked at the nurse, thinking perhaps there'd been a mistake, some switch during the cleanup, but she was smiling, oblivious, handing the baby to Hannah with warmth in her eyes. Hannah's joy faltered the moment she looked down. I watched her expression shift. Confusion, disbelief, then something dangerously close to fear. "Dan," she whispered, her voice cracking, I don't understand." Neither did I wanted to. I wanted someone to walk in and say, "Oops, wrong baby." I wanted a mix-up I could fix with a signature or a phone call. But the baby was wearing the tag, my name, Hannah's. There was no mix-up. According to the records, this child was ours. I pulled the nurse aside, demanded to see the documentation, the logs, the birth record. She smiled, nervous now, and tried to reassure me that everything was in order. I asked to speak with the doctor, with the head nurse, with anyone who could tell me this wasn't what it looked like. But it was. We took him home 2 days later. The doctors confirmed his vitals were perfect. A healthy, full-term baby boy. His name was supposed to be Aaron, and I said it when I looked at him, but the sound felt foreign in my mouth, as if the word didn't belong to me anymore. At home, the kids were confused. My daughter, who was 6, asked why the baby looked so different. I didn't know what to say. Hannah tried, stumbling through words about genes and biology and unpredictability, but I could see the cracks in her voice. She didn't believe her own explanations, and neither did I. We barely spoke those first few days. I slept on the couch. Every time I looked at her, I saw questions she couldn't answer. Every time she looked at me, I saw a plea for mercy she hadn't earned. I began to imagine things. Times she stayed late at school, the way she talked about a new teacher in the science department, that one weekend she went to a conference in Chicago. My mind turned each memory over like a detective, searching for guilt. On the 5th day, I asked her directly. No emotion, just the question. "Is he mine?" Her face crumpled. "Of course he is," she cried, but it sounded like a prayer, not a truth. "Dan, I swear on everything. I've never cheated on you. I don't know how." She broke down before she could finish. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Something inside me was closing. I ordered a paternity test. Hannah didn't fight me. She didn't even argue. She just nodded, numb. That night, she sat alone in the nursery, rocking the baby as silent tears slid down her cheeks. I watched from the hallway, hidden by the doorframe, and felt a coldness spread through me. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But all I saw was betrayal. The results took 8 days. They were conclusive. The child was not biologically mine. I read the report in the kitchen while Hannah slept upstairs. The words felt like a hammer, final, heavy, undeniable. I packed a small bag, left a note that said I needed time, and checked into a hotel near the river. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't respond to the texts that came in waves, then trickled, then stopped. I told no one, not even my brother, not even my closest friend. Shame, I suppose, or pride, or both. On the 3rd night, there was a knock at my door. It was Elizabeth Vanderlake. She stood there in a charcoal coat, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I stared at her, stunned, unable to form a sentence. She smiled softly and said, "I heard you might need company." I let her in. We sat by the window. She didn't pry, didn't ask for details, just offered quiet companionship. She told me about her own divorce, about the way people lie to your face while holding your hand. She spoke in calm, measured tones, always circling the same idea. People disappoint you, but you have to be willing to start over. She said I deserved someone who would never make me doubt my own worth. I didn't say much, I just listened. And when she left, she placed her hand briefly on mine and said, "Call me if you need anything, anything at all." She left her number. I didn't call her right away, but I thought about it. The next day, I drove back to the house. Hannah looked like she hadn't slept in days. She tried to smile when she saw me, but faltered when she realized I wasn't coming home. I asked to see the kids. I hugged them. I said I loved them. And then I left again. That evening, I called Elizabeth. She invited me to dinner, a quiet place on the edge of the city, candlelight, soft jazz, a booth near the back where no one would bother us. She wore a deep green dress, simple and elegant, and looked at me like she already knew what I would say before I said it. "I think I'm going to file," I told her, and she nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting for that moment all along. "Divorce is never easy," she said, "but sometimes it's the only way forward." I didn't protest, didn't question her, just let the words settle. Over the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth and I spoke often, sometimes in person, sometimes over the phone. She sent articles about betrayal, healing, fresh starts. She recommended lawyers. She said, "You're not the kind of man who deserves to be lied to." When the papers were signed, I stood in the courtroom and watched as the judge accepted the dissolution. Hannah was crying. I didn't look at her. I felt like stone, like a man who had stepped outside of his own life and couldn't find the way back in. I moved into a small condo near the office, sterile, quiet, no cinnamon in the air, no children's laughter, just me, a few boxes, and silence. Elizabeth brought me furniture, a new coffee maker, books, a framed painting for the wall. She said, "You need to fill the space with new things." I nodded, numb, and somewhere deep down, a voice whispered that this woman who seemed to understand me so well had arrived at the perfect moment, almost too perfect. But I didn't listen. Not then. I was too busy falling apart, too blind to see the pieces she had been rearranging from the very beginning. In the weeks that followed the divorce, life settled into a hollow rhythm. My condo became a reflection of who I was, or perhaps who I had become. Clean, quiet, deliberately impersonal. I woke early, still out of habit, though now I no longer had anyone to make breakfast for or kiss goodbye. I went to work, came home, stared at the television without hearing what it said, and lay in bed at night listening to the low hum of silence pressing in from the walls. Elizabeth continued to appear, like a ghost with impeccable timing. She never stayed too long. Just long enough to bring over a new chair she thought I'd like, or recommend a book she said changed her life. I thanked her, not because I felt warmth toward her, but because I didn't know what else to do. She was the only person who didn't ask me what had happened, or if I was okay. She treated me like someone who had already made peace with his choices. But I hadn't, not really. I found myself thinking of Hannah more often than I wanted to admit. Not just the fight, not just the baby, but the thousands of invisible threads that had connected our lives for over a decade. The way she tilted her head when she read. The sound of her laugh in the kitchen when the kids told bad jokes. The quiet strength she carried, even in the hardest moments. I missed her, not in a romanticized way, but in the aching, human way that comes when you realize what you had only after you've thrown it away. One rainy afternoon, while walking back from the corner store, I saw an old friend across the street, Brian Madsen. We'd played on the same high school football team. He'd become a systems tech at St. James Medical, the very hospital where Aaron had been born. We hadn't spoken in years, but recognition sparked instantly between us. He jogged over, umbrella in hand, grinning in that familiar easy way. "Dan Everett," he said, clapping me on the back. "Man, you look exactly the same." I forced a smile. Guess some of us age like old furniture. We laughed, made a few jokes about the weather and our gray hairs. I told him I'd moved nearby. He nodded, looking genuinely pleased, and then his expression shifted slightly, more thoughtful, like something had just occurred to him. Your wife had a baby recently, right? Back in April?" I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. Yeah, a boy. His face changed again, flickering between hesitation and concern. He looked around, lowered his voice. Were you in the West Wing? I think so. Room 224. He exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. Dan, I probably shouldn't be saying this. It's not official or anything. But that night, some weird stuff went down in the system. I stared at him. What do you mean, weird? He looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot. I was pulling server logs around midnight. We had a camera outage on your floor. 27 minutes exactly. Every hallway feed glitched out at once. Never happened before. And one of the nursery logs, baby handoff timing, it didn't match the badge scans. I felt my heartbeat slow. A cold, creeping sensation began to move through my arms. Wait, I said, trying to keep my voice even. What are you saying? That the baby wasn't mine because of a computer error? He shook his head quickly. I'm not saying that, just there was something off. One of the nurses disappeared for almost half an hour. Said she went to get meds from another department, but she never signed the requisition sheet. Then she quit the next day, no notice. My mouth felt dry. Who was the nurse? I don't remember her real name, but she looked high-end, not like the usual staff. I remember thinking she didn't belong in scrubs, and she was blonde. He paused. Actually, she looked a little like... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because I already knew. Elizabeth. It was insane, completely irrational, but the second he said it, every bone in my body reacted like a tuning fork. A note that had been humming just beneath the surface now rang with terrifying clarity. I made some excuse and left. My groceries never made it inside the fridge. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring into nothing. Replaying every moment, every glance, every carefully timed gesture Elizabeth had made since that day in the hallway. The way she'd inserted herself into my life just as it began to unravel. The way she had answers when I needed them and silence when I didn't. I needed proof. The next morning, I called a private investigator, not one of the slick ones who advertised on billboards, a quiet professional named Leonard Finch, who specialized in corporate espionage and high-level discretion. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. I gave him names, dates, locations. I told him I suspected foul play surrounding the birth of my son. He didn't blink, said he'd look into it. While I waited, I avoided Elizabeth. She texted twice, once asking if I wanted to try a new Italian place. I didn't answer. She called one evening. I let it ring. 2 weeks later, Finch called me. We need to talk, he said, his voice taut. In person. We met at a diner on the east side, quiet and unremarkable. He slid into the booth across from me and placed a small manila folder on the table. You weren't wrong, he said. I opened the folder. Inside were a series of photographs, grainy but clear enough, surveillance images from the hospital's parking garage. One showed Elizabeth, hair pulled back, sunglasses on, wearing a nurse's uniform and wielding a bassinet. Another showed her scanning a stolen staff badge at a side entrance. A third showed her exiting the building with a covered bundle in her arms. My stomach turned. There's more, Finch continued. She paid off 2 hospital employees. One of them was the nurse who vanished. She wired money to her account from a shell company 3 days before the birth. I couldn't speak, the images blurred. She switched the babies, I said, my voice thin. She actually did it? Finch nodded. Way, Maya? I asked, more to myself than to him. He shrugged. That's beyond my job, but she orchestrated the whole thing. I left the diner in a daze. The city moved around me like a film on mute. I drove aimlessly for an hour before I found myself on the edge of town, in front of a wrought iron gate. Elizabeth's home loomed beyond, a grand stone estate built like a fortress. I buzzed. The gate opened without hesitation. She met me at the door, barefoot, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of white wine. As if she'd been waiting. Daniel, she said, her voice warm, come in. I didn't. I stood in the doorway, shaking. You switched my son. She didn't flinch, didn't look surprised. I did. Silence stretched between us. My fists clenched. My voice was hoarse. "Wait me." She sighed, stepped back, and gestured for me to enter. I didn't move. "You had a perfect life," she said, softly. "A beautiful wife, children, a home. You moved through the world like nothing could touch you. It was infuriating." My breath caught. "You destroyed everything I had," I said. "No," she said calmly. "I revealed what you really are." I stared at her, lost. "You didn't trust your wife?" "Not for 1 second," she continued. "All I did was introduce doubt. The rest, you did that." I shook my head, the room tilting around me. "You're insane." She smiled. "Maybe, but I'm not wrong. You stole my child. I gave you clarity." I turned and walked away. She didn't follow. Back in the car, I broke. For the first time in months, I wept. Not from anger, from guilt, from grief, from the unbearable knowledge that I had believed a lie because it had suited my fears. I had lost Hannah, my children, my name, myself. And the worst part? I had handed it all over without a fight. The world didn't stop spinning, though it felt like it should have. In the days that followed my confrontation with Elizabeth, I moved through time like a man wading through molasses, slow and breathless, every step too heavy, every thought too loud. Nothing made sense anymore, yet everything was suddenly, painfully clear. I had believed the worst about the woman who had given me her life, her trust, her family, had let suspicion bloom like mold in the corners of our home until it rotted through everything we had built together. And all because one woman had decided to prove a point about the fragility of my character. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, I stopped going to work. I let my phone die and didn't bother charging it again for days. I lived in silence, broken only by the occasional echo of my own voice whispering, "How could I?" over and over. Shame, that heavy, colorless thing, settled into my bones. There was no fighting it, no justifying what I'd done. I had condemned my wife, my children. I had walked away not just from them, but from who I was supposed to be. And the sickest part of all was how easily I had done it. When I finally called Hannah, it was just past midnight on a Thursday. My hands trembled as I held the phone. I didn't expect her to pick up, but she did. Her voice was quiet, guarded, exhausted. I couldn't blame her. "It's me," I said. "I need to see you." She didn't answer right away. There was a pause long enough to slice my heart open, and then finally a sigh. "Come tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock. She hung up before I could say thank you. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say. There were no words good enough, no apology deep enough, but I had to try. I had to give her the truth at least, before the rest of the world buried it. The next morning, I stood on her doorstep at exactly 7:58, wearing the same clothes I had slept in, unshaven and pale. The door opened before I knocked. Hannah stood there in a simple gray sweater and jeans. Her face was thinner than I remembered, her eyes shadowed, but she was still her, still beautiful in that unassuming, strong way that made me feel like I didn't deserve her. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." The house was quiet. The kids were at school. The baby, our baby, was asleep in the crib down the hall. I stood in the living room looking at the photos still on the mantle. All 4 of us, smiling, whole. A life that had once felt unshakable. She sat on the edge of the couch and looked at me, waiting. "I was wrong," I said. "So wrong, I don't even know where to start." She didn't say anything, but her eyes filled with something that hurt more than anger. Disappointment. Grief. I took a breath and told her everything. About Elizabeth. About the camera footage, the shell accounts, the nurse who disappeared, the photographs. I told her how Elizabeth had orchestrated it all, how she had wanted to watch me crumble, to prove that I was never as strong or good as I pretended to be. I told her how I had believed the lie because it had given me something to blame. When I was done, there was only the sound of the baby stirring softly in the nursery. "You didn't trust me," she said, finally. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "You looked at me and saw a stranger." "I know," I whispered. "I begged you to believe me." "I know. You looked at your own son and turned away." The tears came then, unbidden, hot and humiliating. I dropped to my knees in front of her, hands shaking, heart pounding. "I can't undo it," I said. "I can't fix what I broke. But I swear to you, Hannah, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." She didn't touch me, didn't speak, just watched me cry. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she stood up and walked to the nursery. I heard her lift the baby, heard him gurgle and coo. She came back with him in her arms and held him out to me. "His name is Aaron," she said, "and he deserves to know his father." I took him, trembling, holding him close. He was heavier than I remembered, warmer, real. His tiny fingers curled around mine as if claiming me. In that moment, I realized it wasn't forgiveness she was offering. It was a chance. The next few days were slow, careful. I stayed away, visiting only with her permission. I helped with errands, played with the older kids, cooked dinner when she needed rest. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't push. I just showed up. Every single day. And slowly, she let me stay longer. We hired lawyers, filed a formal complaint with the hospital. The investigation snowballed. Elizabeth vanished from the company, her name quietly scrubbed from the masthead. I never saw her again, though I read in the paper that she had sold her estate and moved abroad. The hospital administrators tried to deny involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. Settlements were discussed. Charges were prepared. It was all a blur to me. What mattered was Hannah, the kids, Aaron. One afternoon, I found myself alone with our oldest, Lily, helping her with a school project. She looked at me carefully, then said, "Are you going to stay this time?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But promises had to be earned now, not spoken. "I hope so," I said. She nodded and went back to coloring. Weeks turned into months. The baby grew stronger, louder, curious. Hannah began to smile again, cautiously at first, then more freely. One night, after dinner, she said I could sleep in the guest room if I wanted. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't romance, but it was something. A step. I took it. We attended counseling, not the kind with quick solutions or dramatic breakthroughs, the kind where you sit in a circle of pain and learn to breathe through it. I listened more than I spoke. I learned how much she had suffered, how much I had failed. And still, she stayed. Not for me, for the family, because that's who she was. Eventually, we went on a trip together, just the 5 of us, a cabin by a lake we used to visit before everything happened. The first night, we sat by the fire, the kids roasted marshmallows, Hannah rocked Aaron in a chair and stared into the flames. I walked out onto the dock alone, wrapped in a blanket, the night air sharp on my face. She joined me a few minutes later. "You're different," she said. "I'm trying to be. You're still broken. Feeling I always will be." She didn't argue. We stood in silence for a long time. Then she reached out and took my hand. Not tightly, not like before, but not cold either. Just enough. And in that quiet moment, I knew there was no going back to what we had been. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth building ahead. Not a second chance, not redemption, just the truth. And maybe, for the first time, that was enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life tales that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Want more? Watch the next video. You won't want to miss what happens there. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.